Hi, and welcome there, here at the Sunday Watch on Seismic Radio, on BPN Radio, and obviously on the YouTube channel as well. You are listening to right now. Okay, just a quick explanation for those who are not seeing the pictures. I've got a PowerPoint presentation here, so I'll be commenting on the pictures, which may be very annoying for people who look via YouTube, but very useful for those who haven't got the presentation in front of them. So the talk today is about the four apocalyptic riders, and I want to just go back in history for a period, pretty much about 70 plus years ago. And what did people think, maybe not 70 years ago, but about 80 years ago about the Antichrist? 80 years ago about the Antichrist. So if you go 70 years back, we are in... Where are we? In 51, so most of the horrors of the Second World War were over. But if you go a little bit further, like 4 or 5 years, 75 years or so, you're right in the middle of the war. What did people think? Who did people think the Antichrist was? And I think you can probably guess the answer straight away. But I just want to look at this. I don't believe that the Antichrist was in that time. I believe he's still to come, but I believe that, or I think that whatever was happening in that time were the forerunners of the Antichrist. I mean, I once heard Chuck Missler saying that he thinks that the devil had an Antichrist in the wing, ready to turn up and to take over if the opportunity was about to arise. And that was pretty much in every generation. Also, I mean, when we look at the Bible, at the New Testament, I'm going to, in a minute, quote a scripture from John, and they thought that probably Jesus would come back in their own days, in the first generation of Christianity, and they had good reason to believe that as well. Okay, what I'm going to zoom in on today is just the Antichrist, a little bit what we can learn about this character. And so I'm not going to look at all the stuff around it, bearing in mind, 1/3 in the Bible, 1/3 of prophecy in the Bible points to this very time we are in right now. And there's a lot of hints, and it's almost, how shall I say, it's if you know the Bible a little bit, and you've read the Bible, and you've had a look into the prophecies which are in the Bible, it is so blatantly obvious that we are so close to the return of Christ, that the season is here. This is the season of the last days and the end of the last days. I mean, you can make an argument and say the season started 2,000 years ago, but we are right at the end now. So if I looked at the clock, I think we are about a couple of seconds away, if not just a second away, from the rapture, and then obviously, I don't know, it might take 7 years, 10 years, we don't know, but until the end will come. So it'll come very, very quickly. And we can see this from the Bible quite clearly. Okay, so let's have a look at the four apocalyptic riders. I'm just looking at the first 4 seals in the book of Revelation, and my PowerPoint doesn't work, doesn't want to behave. Am I stuck? Here we go. So these are the seals. So that's just taken from the book of Revelation. And we have got, I should put the chapter in there as well. I think it's chapter 5, but is it? Anyway, we'll find out in a minute. 3 is Laodicea. Then we've got the throne room in heaven. That's 4, 5. I think it's 5, but we'll find out in a minute. Okay, anyway, the first seal, we've got the conqueror, and it says, now I saw, this is verse 6, now I saw the Lamb, when the Lamb opened one of the seals, and I heard one of the 4 living creatures saying with a voice like thunder, come and see. And I looked, and behold, a white horse. He who sat on it had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he went out conquering and to conquer. The second seal, when he opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature saying, come and see, and another horse, fiery red, went out, and it was granted to the one who sat on it to take peace from the earth, and that people should kill one another, and there was given to him a great sword. And then the third seal, when he opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, come and see. So I looked, and behold, a black horse, and he who sat on it had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard a voice in the midst of the 4 living creatures saying, a quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and the wine. And then the fourth seal, when he opened the fourth seal, I heard a voice I heard a voice of the fourth living creature saying, "Come and see." So I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and the name of him was sat on it was Death, and Hades followed him. And power was given to him over a fourth of the earth, to kill with sword, with hunger, with death, and by the beasts of the earth. Okay, so this is what we have. Yeah? So we've got, I'm just going to paraphrase it. We've got the first seal, and a lot of people think the first seal, or a lot of expositors came up that this was the Lord Jesus Christ. I don't believe it is. I believe it is something is going on. There's a big conquest going on, suggesting that the earth is controlled by just one super duper leader. And some people might have said, probably in the 1800s, that this was Napoleon. We had in the Second World War, I'm sure people would see that this was what was going on in the Second World War, that the Blitzkrieg came and there was just this conquest of Europe within weeks. We had the First World War where not much happened. People landed in the trenches and they moved a little bit forward and a little bit backward and a little bit forward and backward, and nothing really happened between the fronts until both of them were exhausted. But this was just like a conquest, which took place really, really fast. And probably up to that point of time, it's not been seen, it's not been heard of. Not even the Romans were that fast in their conquest. Anyway, we're going to look at this a little bit more later. We've got the second one, and we had like peace was taken from the earth. Yeah. And we saw this as well, again, when we go to the Second World War. Peace was just taken from the earth. Same with the First World War. That all the nations were sort of happily together, and we had like this great time of people getting together. I remember there was a mission conference in Scotland somewhere. I tried to get some data on it. I just heard about it, and all the evangelicals of Europe gathered together, and they wanted to generate the last push, and that was just before the First World War, the last push to get the gospel out to the ends of the earth. And then the Second World War happened, and these people who were ready, to go to the ends of the world and to move the gospel to wherever it's not being preached and to push it through Europe and through everywhere, they were caught up in the First World War. They couldn't go anywhere. They had to fight in the trenches. And we started having the communist revolution in the East, which pretty much stopped Christianity, or any progress of Christianity, open progress of Christianity. It did progress, but that was just through hidden movements in the underground, and we had like a massive stalling of the missionary effort, which was on the way, and it was almost getting there to reach out, but it was stopped. It was stopped through the First World War, just a little bit afterwards. And you think it might have been a ploy of the devil? I'm sure it was a ploy of the devil. And peace was taken from the earth. And the way the First World War, it stopped it. The Second World War obviously stopped it as well, but the First World War. And the way it was set up was quite bizarre. Sort of when you look at the way nations allied themselves and the way everything was going on, it was just like people talk about a powder keg just waiting for the spark to ignite it. And that spark was in the First World War, was just in Yugoslavia, and I'm not sure whether it was Serbia or Croatia, but anyway, down there in the Balkans, where the Crown Prince got shot by a revolutionary, and then suddenly all of Europe went into war, and yet the First World War. It's interesting when you see this, and it looks, when you look at this, and you see when you open the second seal, come and see. Second creature said, come and see. Fire and another horse, fiery red, went out and was granted to the one that sat on it to take peace from the earth. Peace was literally just taken from the earth in the First World War. The Second World War was pretty much a result of the First World War, where some nations sat together, humiliated a third nation. In this instance, it was Germany, and put lots of pressure on Germany. It was just a matter of time for Germany to rise back up again. And in this vacuum, and one ugly little guy, he made it, and he could rise up in this humiliation with a call to revenge and to make the nation great again. And so the sword came back out again, and and it was interesting again when you look at this period and you see what was going on, and when you look at the second seal, you think this fits really, really well. Obviously, I don't believe that the second seal was opened there and then, but I think something similar will happen as well. That there will be a time when everybody thinks, "Oh no, it's great, we've got peace and tranquility, peace and security," especially from maybe an Israeli perspective, from a Jewish perspective. A lot of the Bible has been written from the Jewish perspective, and then suddenly it's just this spark and the earth goes into massive conflict and a lot of people die. The third seal, scarcity on earth. We have seen this after the First and also after the Second World War. I was talking to people, like my mother, she still remembers she was a child in the Second World War, so she remembers some of the periods there. And scarcity was a real big issue. People, even during the wartime and after the war as well. It only stopped sort of in the 50s, but rationing was still going on well into the 50s in Germany and in England. So everyday products like milk, bread, and other stuff was rationed. There was a flourishing black market. I remember lots of stories of my grandfather that he had a distillery and he was selling alcohol illegally just to make ends meet. Yeah. And he was like one of my grandmother. She was a farmer's daughter, or she came from a village, so they had connections to farmers. So they got all the stuff to produce alcohol, and people were quite depressed and frustrated, naturally, after the war. So there was a great demand for alcohol, and you couldn't get it normally. So it was just on the black market where you could get these things. And then we've got the fourth seal as well, and there was a pale horse, death and Hades followed him, and power was given to them over a fourth of the earth to kill with sword, with hunger, with death, or by the beasts of the earth. Now you can understand this last scripture in two ways. One of them is that a fourth of the population are killed, or that this killing takes place in a fourth of the earth. Yeah. Again, when you look at this period between 1900 and 1950s, early 50s, you can see that pretty much a fourth of the earth, if not more, was involved in this killing, which took place. But also, I'm going to show you the figures in a minute. It looks like from the population we've had around the turn of the century, which was about 2 billion, that very close to a fourth of them, to a quarter of them, died due to an unnatural death. I mean, it doesn't say here unnatural death, it says sword, hunger, death, and by the beasts of the earth. Now, the last one, and this is probably an indicator that it's not really the seals which opened at the beginning of the last century, because we didn't see anything like the people were killed by the beasts of the earth. Beasts didn't turn on humans. Yeah. So there's no report that this was taking place. There are reports now, though, that a lot of beasts which normally are quite peaceful, they start goring humans. Yeah, you get like incidences here and there, and you hear little things in the news, and it's quite interesting when you look out for that. And this may be an element right to the end times when this fourth seal is opened. So I don't think it is there, but it was sort of in the 19th century. It wasn't the fourth seal, but it was like a foreshadowing of what is likely to come. And when we look at this period in time, we are not quite there to a quarter, but it's very, very close to a quarter of the world's population who died in a period of about 50 years. Now, if you say, if you take the figure like it says here, by sword, hunger, and death includes normal, just people dying, we are well over a quarter of the population who died. Beginning, when you look at the figures from the beginning of the 1900s, and by 1950 we had about 2.3 billion. That's what the estimates are. Nobody really knows. I'm convinced of that, but when you take natural death in there, you're well over 250 million people who have died during this period. So this matrix, which you can see here in the book of Revelation, does fit somewhat. It is not quite there, but it does fit somewhat to the first part of the 20th century, to the first half of the 20th century. A little bit more than the first half, but I'm going to show you some of the figures now. But I think it's just a foreshadowing. And I want you to think about it as well. So I'm not trying to make the point here that the seals have already been opened and it happened some time ago. I'm not doing that. I don't believe that. But I believe what happened was a foreshadowing of what is to come. And I think it's totally irresponsible when you've got preachers and people going around and preaching prosperity and the supernatural and all that. Really what we should be doing is we should be preaching the gospel to make sure that people will come into the fold, that they will be saved and redeemed by the blood of Christ before all this stuff happens. I believe that we will not be here. Yeah, we will not be here. I think the church is gone. And this is when you look at the book of Revelation, you get chapter 2 and 3 talking about the church, and then you don't hear about the church anymore. You hear about the saints, you hear about Israel, but you don't hear about the church. So this dispensation will have gone, and I believe that we won't be here. But I believe that we have got an understanding, especially my generation, because I used to listen to my granddads, and I used to listen to other old people when I was a teenager, and they'd been through the war. And the stories you hear are quite horrendous. They're quite horrendous, but also encouraging stories as well. I remember an old preacher who was telling me sort of the miracles God did during this time to protect people who couldn't protect themselves anymore. And it was quite a lot of interesting stories, but that is for another time. So the point I'm trying to make is, if you are sealed, not by the Antichrist with the mark of the beast in this period of time, but you miss it now, the rapture comes, you find yourself on the other side of the rapture, all this stuff starts kicking off. You decide, right, that's it, I need to be serious with God, and you give your life to Jesus Christ before the great deception comes and you haven't got a chance to do it anymore. You will suffer hardship, but you will also see the power of God. And I can witness to that from the stories I've heard of old people when I was a teenager who went through the Second World War, who saw all the miracles of God taking place in the midst of the hot air. Okay, we've got the first four seals of Revelation, the book of Revelation. And I've got a couple of pictures here. You see the four apocalyptic riders. We've got Russian cards, and we've got inflation as well, which is indicated with the apocalyptic riders. So you have like 100 billion Deutschmark. So again, about 2 Deutschmark used to be $1, I think. Yeah, roughly around about there. And or 2 or 3 a pound, 2 Deutschmark a euro. Here we've got 100 billion. This is the inflation which was taking place. But it goes further. The inflation, I think the suggestion is not like a denarius, but it's about a day's wages. So a day's wages for a little bit of bread. So that would be a loaf of bread would probably be the equivalent of $200-300, something like that. Maybe $400, $500, whatever you can earn in a day. I'm not sure how much it is. It's probably about $100 if you do a manual labor job. So, prices are going up. I can see this now, but this may be down to whatever we've been through in the last year. Again, we look at conquest. Conquest took place, Second World War, massive amount of conquest. So all of Europe was pretty much overrun, other than Britain, was pretty much overrun in a very short period of time. And we are not talking about years of warfare. We talk about... Poland was attacked, and that was done in a couple of weeks. It's a relatively short time. Then France started to kick off, and Britain as well. So France was pretty much conquered in a very short period of time. I'm not exactly sure. I'm not that good a history buff. But it was a relatively short period of time. It wasn't years. It was a short period of time, and then it was over. No more war. And then at the same time, you had Holland, Belgium was overrun, Denmark was overrun. Sweden supposedly was neutral. I think Norway was overrun by German troops, and Austria was taken in. The Czech Republic just gave up. So they gave up their power, and it was kind of integrated into the German Reich. Then we had I'm not sure what happened in the Balkans, but most of Europe was overrun in a very short period of time. And this is conquest. This is what it says. It came out to conquer and conquest. And it was very, very fast conquest. So again, I'm looking at the people, and I'm looking at my grandmother, my step-grandmother. She told me that when Hitler came, they all thought, they didn't like him. She lived in a village. They didn't like him. And they all thought that that Hitler was the Antichrist. And my big question is, were they justified in thinking that? And I think when I look at some of the information which is coming through, if you know your Bible, and what you find is that if you take the template, and you've got your template of what is the Antichrist going to be like, and we're going to look at this. Is it the next one? Just going to go to this slide here. But they thought that he was it. This was the Antichrist. He was the one who was going to finish off the people of Israel, or trying to finish them off. And we've got this there as well. We've got this in Daniel and in Revelation, that he's going after the Jews. He was certainly going after the Christians as well. It's not much publicized, but he was. I know one guy, William Bush, he got arrested several times for his outspokenness against the regime, as the regime started to go against Christian values and started teaching stuff which was de facto anti-Christian. Hitler even said that when they're done with the Jews, they're going to go after the Christians. So that was the next thing, and they wanted to finish them off. And they did this through the Hitler Youth and other things. And and they just went for it. Now, there were a couple of characters in the 30s which were there. I heard somebody saying that people thought in the 30s that Hitler was the Antichrist and Stalin the false prophet. I looked a little bit at the history, and I think Joseph Goebbels, who was in the context of the time, a really good orator, so he could speak really well, and he could get people, into euphoria and all sorts of stuff. Yeah, he would have made a really good preacher. The problem is he was on the wrong side, but he was a false prophet. He was the sea of the beast of the sea, who or equivalent to that. He wasn't, but he was equivalent to that. Just to correct my words here, and he was pointing to Hitler, and he made people to worship Hitler. And what was going on? It was the worship. They didn't say this, but there was something like a worship going on. When you go east, something similar happened to Stalin as well, and you could probably run a similar analogy between Lenin and Stalin, that Lenin was worshipped and Stalin was there as well. I'm not sure whether there were any assassination attempts on him, but I don't want to sort of go into this way, because that maybe people in Russia would have thought, Christians in the Soviet Union would have thought that Stalin was maybe the Antichrist, the way he was treated, the way he was worshipped. Again, the guy was one of the biggest culprits. I would say he was probably a bigger culprit in his generation, especially in his nation, in his country, than what Hitler was. Especially with the death toll he was responsible for amongst his own people. I'm going to look at the figures in a minute. But anyway, there was some really bad stuff going on. And when the Antichrist comes, we have to be prepared for the same thing. Yeah. And again, if you listen to this as well, it's, don't just make sure you're right with God. This is probably the most important thing, and you walk in the ways God wants you to walk. Very, very important. Very important, especially as the times are heating up, and whatever we are seeing now, the corruption in high places, all the signs just sort of lining up one after the other, the technology being there for the Antichrist to do what he wants to do, and also for the prophecies which we have got in Daniel and in Revelation to be fulfilled, which were kind of almost there in the 30s, but not quite. And you would have to stretch sort of the interpretation quite a bit to try and make it fit. But today you don't even need to stretch it a bit, not a tiny bit. It just fits. Yeah. So I think all we are waiting for is the end of this dispensation, and then the Great Tribulation to arrive. I mean, we're not waiting for it. I'm not waiting for it. I'm waiting for the Lord to come back, to take us home, to take us to where we belong. And I hope that he'll come soon. Yeah, this world is getting crazy, and it's getting really, really bad. But again, it's interesting, and this is what I try to do with this presentation, to look at what was going on in the 30s, what people thought, whether they were justified in thinking so, and looking at this ruler or the matrix, and looking at all the checks which we can make. And when we go to the 30s, we can make an awful lot of checks when we look at the personalities which were around at the time. And we can have our little checklist and tick everything off. But there are a couple of checks which aren't fulfilled and which weren't fulfilled at the time. And that pretty much excludes him. And all we can say is like John said, little children, it is the last hour. And as you have heard that Antichrist is coming, even now, many Antichrists have come, by which we know that it is the last hour. That is what John says in 1 John 2:18. And I think when we look back into history, and we look at this era in history, we know what is, we can have an image of what we are to expect, but it's going to be far worse. We are not talking about 88 million deaths, probably more in the order of 880 million dead people in the next war that is coming. We know a quarter would be 2.5 billion, and then another third, whatever is left, will die. So we know about half the world's population, so that's about 4 billion people will have died by the time Christ comes back. And Jesus said if he didn't shorten the days, no flesh would survive. This is how bad the time is going to be. So make sure, and if you are not right with God, and you are not a Christian, you have never given your life to Jesus Christ, let this be be a reason for you to change your ways. Because whatever you base your life on, if you are looking for prosperity, a nice life, a nice house, nice family and all that, forget it. You're not going to get it. You might get it for a very short period of time, but it's not going to last. We are right at the end of the end times, which pretty much started 2,000 years ago. But we are right at the end at the end of it. That's what I'm convinced of. And I don't know when. And obviously, we are talking long periods of times. It could be literally a second away from it. It could be that we are still a couple of years away from it, maybe a couple of decades. I don't know, but we are very, very close. And I think if you try to base your life on anything other than Jesus Christ, you're going to lose out in a great way. Okay, a couple of questions I've got here. Was the generation right in assuming that Hitler was the Antichrist? I already intimated yes, kind of. Yeah, they were almost there, but obviously it the end didn't end the way we know in the book of Revelation it's going to end, namely the return of Christ and that Jesus comes back to finish off the Antichrist. It didn't come back. It didn't happen like that. And a lot of other stuff didn't happen either. The temple wasn't built up. Hitler never sat in the temple of the Jews. You could maybe use metaphors, or I'm looking for a word, I can't find it. You could sort of talk around, he destroyed the synagogues, he destroyed the church, and he put himself, as the highest pseudo-religious authority and stuff like that. And in that way, he was sitting in the temple, and he was blasphemous, which he was. There's no doubt about this. He was having very great words against God. I mean, he didn't sort of mock God directly, from what I know, but he had his pseudo-religion, which was very anti-Semitic, which excluded Jesus Christ, and it was more the Norse gods, and this is the way he wanted to go. Was he close in fulfilling prophecy? He was, actually. When you look at, we're going to look at this in a minute, you will see that it's a surprising amount of stuff happened. And if you knew your Bible in the 30s, and you were going through this time, you would have thought, that's it, That's it, it's just going to unravel, because so much of it is lining up. And again, the big question is, what can we learn from history regards of what may be coming? And I think it's an awful lot. I think whatever happened in this period of time is like an image of what will happen in the future. In the same way of maybe Napoleon might have been a forerunner as well, and he was just being an image of the next, big thing, and that was like the next century, the following century, when Hitler came to power, the next Napoleon, and I believe the next guy is going to be the Antichrist. But anyway, we will see. Okay, this is very small print if you're watching on YouTube. I'm just going to read it out. These are the features of the Antichrist, and it's a little list. Yeah. First of all, he's going to be blasphemous. Yeah. So he's got he mocks God. He puts himself in the place of God, and that is one way to recognize him. And Hitler pretty much was blasphemous at least as far as Jesus Christ is concerned. They wanted to Aryanize him. They made a point that he was that his father was not Joseph, but just some Phoenician guy or some Philistine or whatever. Yeah. So they were coming up with all these crazy ideas. They tried to infiltrate the church and get onto committees and things like that, and then try and make sure that the Nazi propaganda got in there. He was a world dictator, and when you look at the Axis powers in the Second World War, there were actually 10 nations. It's interesting as well, but we know the Antichrist will have 10 nations, which will surrender their power to the Antichrist. And the Treaty of Rome was designed with 10 nations, so that's the EU. So a lot of people think that this is going to be the EU. Some people think it's somewhere going to be in the Middle East. Some people say that the world is going to be divided into 10 regions, and then whoever is in charge of each region will hand power over to the Antichrist, and so on. He has evil power and he has great authority. That's what the Bible tells us. He has a mortal wound on his head, and survives it. So it's almost like a resurrection experience, or mimicking the resurrection of Christ. So everybody thinks, oh, he's gone now, he's dead, and then he comes back from it. He makes war with the saints and overcame. Hitler pretty much did the same thing. If you consider the saints to be the nation of Israel, the Jews, he certainly made war with them, and he certainly overcame. And they were, especially if they didn't get out of time in the 30s to leave the country, the Jews were in dire straits. Yeah. They were in real dire straits, and it was a horrible time for them. The Christians were meant to be next, so after he was done with them, he wanted to carry on with the Christians. So he was literally making war with the saints, and he was overcoming them for a period of time. Authority over every nation and tribe. Now, Hitler never had authority over every nation and tribe. Britain never succumbed. It was close, and they almost conquered Britain. If he had done it, the history of Europe might have been very, very different. But he didn't. Yeah, he didn't. The Japanese were very strong. These are part of the Axis power, so they controlled China. And they obviously attacked Russia as well, and they did their stuff in a lot of places in the Far East, and they did control a lot. That's part of the Axis power, but really they never conquered the whole world. The Axis power almost did it, and it looked at one stage, especially with the Blitzkrieg, this lightning strike war. That's what the translation is for that they were almost doing it, but they didn't quite get there. And it's interesting as well, the Germans almost got Russia. Hitler knew of Napoleon's era to go there in wintertime. He couldn't do his campaign as he wanted to because he was held back with Italy failing in their agenda in North Africa. So he had to reroute troops. Again, some analysts think if Hitler hadn't done this, he would have taken Russia, and Russia would have been under German control. And he was very, very close. He was very, very close to beating the Russian troops, as he was very close to beating the English as well, or the British troops. So he didn't do it. Yeah. And probably because he didn't do it, that pretty much made sure that he couldn't conquer the world. If he had conquered Russia, he had conquered Britain, the rest would have just fallen like dominoes. I think the last power that would have been able to stand against him was America. America till then decided to stay out of the war. They might have decided to stay neutral after that, just let Europe do their own things. I don't know, but it was very, very close. I believe when the Antichrist comes, the conquest will not stop. And this is the first seal. So this conquest will just go on and on and on. And everything, all the dominoes will fall. And people say, who can make war against the beast? This is what we find in Revelation. And I think this is what people will say. People will worship him. Hitler got worship. We have got the stretched out arm with the salute, the Heil Hitler salute. And people were worshipping the guy. It was de facto a worship. And my granddad was telling me, I had one granddad who was, he didn't like the Nazis, couldn't stand the sight of them. And he told me that when he went to work on his bicycle and he saw some troops, SA or something marching along, they would all stretch out their arm and do the salute, the Hitler salute. He said he had to do a very little one, and because he didn't like it, and he despised these people, and he said if you didn't do it, they would just beat you up. Yeah. If you didn't do it, they would just go after you and beat you up, and you were in trouble straight away. So there was quite a lot of endorsement, and maybe it's going to be similar with the Antichrist as well. If you don't have the mark of the beast, you will be very much rejected by people who have the mark. It's a bit like that. If you don't have the vaccine, you're looked down upon by those who have taken the vaccine. And you are considered to be a traitor, treasonous, and all the rest of it. Yeah. And it's getting there a little bit, and I think the vaccine is maybe a forerunner of the mark of the beast. It's not the mark of the beast, but they're going to look who is complying, who's not complying, who takes a poison, and I don't know. So maybe that goes in this direction. Okay, he shows himself to be God and demands worship sitting in the temple. Now, first of all, there was no temple. That's in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 4. So that's the Antichrist. Now, Hitler didn't have a temple to sit himself in. I don't think he ever claimed that he was God. He didn't make these outrageous claims. But he said something that he has been predestined to be here. He was from the predestination. And he said things to that effect. A time of trouble as never before, and you can say this about World War II. You know, he had lightning from heaven with all the bombs and stuff like that which were falling, and the trouble which happened in the Second World War never happened before to that extent. The way the cities were, I mean, they said about Dresden, for example, it was like hell. They said even that the water was burning. Probably it was just some oil that ran into the water or something, but the river Elbe, is it the Elbe? I'm not sure. Anyway, the river near Dresden was on fire. That's what people said. People said that concrete was burning. This is how hot the heat was. And they did in Dresden, I think I'm not sure whether it was Bama Harris, but one of the guys in Britain, they pretty much knew that the war was over. They had all this stuff. They thought that a lot of troops were around there, and so they decided to just level Dresden to the ground. And what happened there was absolutely horrendous, unnecessary as well. And it was just I would call it almost a genocide that was going on there. It was just, it's the end of the war. We've got all these bombs. Let's get rid of them and kill as many people as possible. And they kind of succeeded. Changed times and the law. He certainly changed the law. Times, not really. Daniel 11:37 is an interesting scripture. It kind of suggests that the Antichrist may not be that interested in women. So he may not be married, he may not have children, he may be gay. And it depends how you read the Hebrew text. So I leave this to you. Hitler, interestingly, he was never married during the war. A story has it that he married Eva in the Führer bunker. Other suggestions are that he actually got out and he died somewhere in South America. I don't know what the truth is, but it was interesting as well. So he wasn't that. I'm going to go on that as well. He's got sinister schemes. He exalts himself above all. Promise of peace and security, and we hear this in Matthew 24. And then it'll all come all crushing down. He will destroy the prosperity of many. It's interesting as well. So there's a lot of prosperity in the world right now. Poor people or working class people, they've got a very comfortable life compared to generations before us. And the prosperity of many will be destroyed. So, my friends, there's no point in chasing after the mighty dollar. It's not going to be worth much, and you won't have much either. Yeah? And everything is going in this direction at the moment anyway. Let's have a look at 1900 to 1950. So we've got the world population, which was 200 million, about 2 billion people. Yeah? We've got the death rate here. So we've got, and this is sort of going at this whole thing that in the fourth seal it says that a quarter of the population is going to die. We've got the death toll here, and you can see there are a lot of people who died during the Second World War, a lot of people who died during the First World War, and my mouse doesn't work. You see there are a couple of, on this graph, a couple of spikes. There is a flu spike as well. Again, I'm not sure how precise this list is, but the suggestion is that there were more people dying on account of the flu after the war than during the war, during the First World War. Okay, I've got some figures here. I'm just going to go through them. So World War I, the officially recognized figure that is sort of spouting about is about 18 million. The Spanish flu was about 20 million. We had hyperinflation during this time as well. We had a time of peace and prosperity between 1920 and 1930. It's interesting as well when you look at the death rate. It's really low during this time as well, between 1920 and 1930. It's almost like a little bit of rest and nothing much happening. People just taking it easy, enjoying oneself. We had the roaring 20s people talk about, where people just take it easy, have got a good life, hang out in bars and stuff like that. So that is all from the 1920s. 1930s, a lot of prosperity. The average man, average worker, average family can suddenly afford a car. They've got their own motors. They start traveling. They've got like programs where you can, do a cruise on a ship liner. You can travel worldwide. Stuff like that has been unheard of before. People were not just in survival mode, but they were in enjoyment mode, in the fun mode, in the 1920s and 1930s. 1930s, we had Jewish pogroms which started kicking in, but there was also a move of worldwide anti-Semitism which kicked in. There were people trying to flee on a cruise liner, on a ship to other countries, and even though people had visas for other countries weren't accepting them. It was a really, really strange time. There was literally worldwide anti-Semitism. So Jewish people had a very hard time during this period. And again, a lot of stuff is forgotten. It's just all the fingers from all the world point to Germany with the Holocaust. Nobody looks, into their own history to see how they were dealing with Jewish people at the time, and also further down in history. And it wasn't a pretty picture. It's not a pretty picture when you look at what was going on worldwide. World War II comes in 1939, and we, by 1945, we enter with a death toll of 88 million. So that's the official figure. We got bread rationing until the 50s in Germany and Britain, and I think in other countries as well. So that was just rationing of, I'm not sure whether it was just bread, or it was bread, but it was rationing of all sorts of foods like eggs, meat, butter, and so on. So that went on well into the 50s, and people were paying a lot of money for food outside the rations. The Soviet Union under Stalin, and there are two figures. One of them is just Soviet Union in general in the 20th century, and they say that 61 million people died an unnatural death during the reign of socialism. So again, if you look at this figure, in Russia or in the Soviet Union, there were about, I think, 240 million people or something, round about there. So a quarter of the people died an unnatural death unnecessarily, either through war or through internal persecution, things like that. Under Stalin, the figure goes between 5 and 40 million. So this is what Stalin himself is responsible for. So he wanted to have like a purge and make sure that anybody who could oppose him is gotten rid of, and he gave quotas to every district to execute X amount of people, and that's easy. It's hard to do production, but to kill people is fairly easy. So what happened is that the the leaders of these districts, they wrote back to Stalin to tell him that the quota has been fulfilled, and they were requesting more figures. This is how the fear mentality was. They're requesting more figures to kill more people of their own. Really mad, absolutely mad what was going on. And this is the fruit of when a nation decides no more God, and they turn their back on God. And they want to run their own affairs. This is what happens, that a quarter of the people are murdered within one generation. We had something else as well. We had the Great Leap in China, which was in 1958, so it was, past the first half of the 20th century. And the death toll of the famine there was about 50 million. And that was an artificial famine. They had the Great Leap, and they tried to smelt any piece of iron they had to become an industrial nation. But then suddenly the farmers had no tools to work the fields. And so the next year they had no food. And then people started starving. And that was the great leader Mao Zedong, what he did. And you kind of think, what? Is the guy completely gone? Couldn't he see this happening if he's asking people to do this stuff? But But they were just crazy people. They were insane people who were at the top of the of the government. And I believe that there was maybe a blinding through God as well. People again abdicated from God. They didn't want to know about God. They embraced a godless philosophy, godless politics, and that is the result. It's the same with Nazi Germany as well. They got rid of Christianity, or wanted to get rid of Christianity, and when the war was over, it was just a broken nation, cut into 4 parts, people ethnically cleansed, and all sorts of stuff going on. The death toll through unnatural death, when you add those figures up, it's about 216 million. So it's just short of a quarter. But then again, when you take natural death in this equation, then you are well over 216 billion. So you could maybe make an argument that within one generation we have the 4th horse with death. But again, we've got the problem with the beasts. People didn't get killed by beasts unnaturally, or at least you didn't hear any stories of that from that time. But it was just wars and famines. Many of the famines were artificial famines. There weren't famines which came by nature, but there were famines which were man-made famines. Same in the Ukraine as well. All done, instigated by Stalin. That man was a real big problem. I'll give you one example about Stalin. I read one story about him, and this was when the Bolshevik Revolution was going on, and he wanted to become a priest, and then he decided he turned his back on God, and he wanted to become a revolutionary, and he joined the Bolshevik Revolution. They needed money, and he decided to rob a bank. So normally when you rob a bank, you go in the bank, and you have a weapon or something, you ask for a lot of money, and then that's the end of the robbery, and you hope not to get caught. What he did is he went into the bank, he shot everybody with this gang he was with. He shot everybody and killed everybody in the bank, and then he cleared all the money out and he went off. This was the way Stalin robbed banks, and he pretty much later on robbed the Soviet Union in the same way. He just murdered people without relent. Okay, let's have a look at life in 1939. What did life look like? There was peace and security. There are some pictures here from life in 1939. It was good. It was a good life. There were peace accords with different powers. So the Germans had a peace accord with the Russians. The English, they had some appeasement. Chamberlain came over to make sure that there was peace with Hitler. The French didn't really expect anything to kick off. There was prosperity as never before worldwide. People had... They've gone from survivalism to enjoying life, just taking it easy. The economies were relatively strong, so people had money, production was going on, industrial power and industrial strength was going on. There was a lot of mechanization taking place. There were new means of production, which made, released workers and created more wealth. World travel was possible, so we've got this prophecy in Daniel which said that people were going to and fro at the end times. There was a lot of anti-Semitism, but also a lot of Jews did assimilate. And now in Germany, a lot of Jews they would celebrate Christmas because it was called German Christmas, Deutsche Weihnacht, and because they were so nationalistic, Jews that is, that they would celebrate it. And a lot of them were heroes in the First World War. A lot of Jews were in the military and things like that. So suddenly this move to anti-Semitism was completely unnatural because the majority of the Jewish people in Germany were very, very well integrated into society. And you wouldn't know that somebody was Jewish other than, they told you. This was the situation at the time. But then suddenly this anti-Semitism came up, and you can see the spiritual dimension in all of it. Germany had slowly turned anti-Christian as well. So you had the Hitler youth, the church youth were pretty much banned at the time. I heard a lot of stories by a pastor who was working during this time and who was focusing on sharing the gospel with young people, and it was really, really difficult. And they were given a lot of problems by the administration in the 30s. It wasn't forbidden. They didn't do this outright because they couldn't at that point, but it was getting stronger and stronger against them. The economy created a strong military, which was seen as a peace guarantor, and that was in Germany in particular, and possibly Russia. They had some purges in the military, and Russia was pretty weak because they got rid of all the good generals, because Stalin was afraid that they would go against him. and the army was pretty much on its knees by the time Hitler went in. Again, people were engaging in leisure activity rather than survival. So it was a very different lifestyle to... I remember my granddad telling me that when the First World War was on, he was born in 1911, and he told me that that his parents were really, really poor. I mean, they were hardworking people, but they were poor, and they were really struggling to make ends meet. And he remembers his childhood as being hungry all the time. And they had like a military barracks near where my granddad lived, and he said like he and his mates, when they were kids, they had like a big pot of soup or something for the soldiers, and when they were done with the kitchen, they just went in there and they scraped the rests out from the pot to have something to eat. This is what the life was before the First World War. In the Second World War, and before, like when you go up to 1939, that wasn't an issue anymore. People had plenty of food, they had plenty of wealth, they could do things, they lived very prosperous and good lives. Yeah. Now Hitler came on the scene, and this is interesting as well. He was a man coming from nowhere. He had no working relationships with women. So in working meaning whenever he had a woman or a partner, it just didn't work out. There's a trail of women whom he dated, and they committed suicide. It's quite weird when you sort of read his life story. I mean, people he engaged with, they were just sucked into some sort of abyss and couldn't cope with life anymore. There's a whole list of assassination attempts which were made on him. The last one was made in 1944 by Stauffenberg, and the bomb went off, but he was protected somehow through a pillar in the room. And I think he had some injury on his head, but it didn't kill him. And it was like nobody could kill the beast. Yeah. And again, that probably a lot of people would have thought, yeah, Antichrist, here we go. He was 12 years in power, and he was 6 years at war. Of these 12 years, he was an outspoken anti-Semite. So it all qualifies him to be Antichrist. Some people say that, the 666, the mark of the beast, which is the number of his name, when you use something called gematria, in Hebrew it comes out with 303. I think that's the whole name that's out of Hitler. And in English with 660. Yeah? So it doesn't quite kind of work out. But some people, they do some mathematical formulas, and depending on how you put it together, it actually comes up with 666. That's what they claim. But anyway, I don't know whether they were looking at this in the 40s, but again, I think they just looked at the whole picture and they thought this must be him. Then the biggie is Hitler demanded worship with a salute, and if you didn't worship him, if you didn't have a picture of Hitler in your office and you didn't treat him like a god, you were in deep trouble. Okay, other facts. The Blitzkrieg initial conquest completed in weeks. There was a worldwide war theater. Yeah, it pretty much was worldwide. America was involved. I think South America was pretty much off the hook. You had wars in China, in India, Thailand, Africa. Australians were involved, even though the war didn't come to Australia. And then here we've got the interesting thing as well. I've got a little list here, and these are the Axis powers. So they were all allied with Germany. And we've got Germany, Italy, Japan, Hungary, Romania, Slovak Republic, Bulgaria, State of Croatia, Finland, and Thailand. So they were all part of the Axis, and you come to 10 countries. And again, you look at this, and you look at the Daniel, and you look at the Book of Revelation, you think, yeah, 10 nations getting together and handing their power over to this guy. They didn't really, some of them were more allied with Japan than with Germany. And when we look at Hitler, at Italy at Mussolini, and I'm sure that some like the Slovak Republic, maybe Slovak Republic less so, but Croatia and places like that would more look towards Italy as the great ally in across the Adriatic Sea. There was Christian persecution, and also what we find is there was a massive amount of Nazi involvement with the occult. So they were really into this. They were into demon worship, the lot. Yeah. And this is what the deception which fed in there. And again, when you look at the spiritual makeup of Germany at the time, people were sworn in, they worshipped this guy. And because of their worship, God, I'm convinced, led them into their delusion and gave them to their delusion. And the delusion became bigger and bigger right to the end. And when it all came crashing down, people really struggled with life later on. There were a lot of suicides. A lot of people had no more perspective. There's also an interesting thing. A lot of people who were sworn in on Hitler. You've in Germany got something like a lost generation as far as the gospel is concerned. A lot of people from this generation, they never really went on with the gospel. Some people converted, some people went there, but when you looked at churches, you had like really old people who came to Christ prior to all this happening, and then young people. But there was like a generation was missing. It was quite interesting to see when you look at this. Okay, we come to the conclusion. We've got a few minutes left. Whatever happened in the 20th century was very unique. It didn't happen before. It never happened before this side of the flood. But looking in the future, whatever is going to come is going to be worse. What happened in 1945, 1933, 1930s and 1940s. A quarter of the population in the first half of the century possibly died of an unnatural death. We don't know the exact figures. And again, a lot of these figures are inflated or underflated. So we don't know. Deflated, I think is the term. They're inflated or deflated. So we don't really know. Nobody really knows what the real figures are. And it's hard to assess. Only, and I say this with utmost reverence, only God knows the exact figure of people who died an unnatural death during this period. Hitler clearly wasn't the Antichrist, but he was a forerunner. He had a lot of characteristics, and we can see a lot of traits of the Antichrist in him, but he was just one of the Antichrists, but not the Antichrist. Whatever is to come will be worse than what the 1930s brought to the world. And this is what you have to understand. Whatever is going to come next is going to be worse. When the seals are opened, what you will see is going to be worse than what you saw with Hitler. Deception was big and people fell for these lies. And you will find the same as well. So the only protection you have is if you've got the Holy Spirit in your life, you will not be deceived. Jesus says that it would even deceive the elect if that were possible. If you are one of the elect, you will not be deceived, but you will see through it all, and you can take the guidance of the Holy Spirit, and you can walk through this time not being deluded, not being deceived. And a new generation may be ready for the next last big deception. We've got a new generation coming up now. They've got no link anymore with what happened in the 1930s. Quite interesting. So the so-called millennials, and I think the grandparents, who I was still listening from, first accounts from my grandparents, the next generation after me, which is upcoming, they don't have this anymore. Most of these people have died. The link with this period is gone, and the link with this deception is gone. They just read from it on the books, and it's a little bit, or YouTube or whatever, but it's not relevant anymore because they don't know people who have been in this time, and I think the next generation is going to be ready for the last big deception. So again, if you are a millennial and you are there, if you don't come to Christ, you will fall for all the lies which are there, and you will run into your own death and your own demise. So it's time for you to come to Christ. I'm running out of time. So God bless. Thank you for listening to this talk. Make sure that you come to Jesus, and make sure that you surrender your life to Jesus, and that you ask for truth in your life, and that you don't fall for the lies which are soon to come, and for the delusion which is soon to be there worldwide. We've seen it in the 1930s and in the 1940s, what delusion does to people in Germany. And also in other parts of the world, the same thing is going to hit us again. Okay, God bless and bye-bye from Michael here at Seismic Radio at the Sunday Watch here.